So we're talking about flight delays when it comes to claiming money back. What exactly are your rights? Martin knows, and he's here now. So should we start with EU flights?
Yeah, this is the big one. This is the big regulation that's out there, and this can be big money. Samantha got in touch with me the other day on social media. She said, I used your info to claim for a delay to Cancun. Took a couple of days, just a couple of days, to get £2,272 for me and the family. That'll go towards next year's holiday. Now, I noticed, you hear I said Cancun, but we're talking about EU. That's because what counts, this is the EU regulation 261/2004. Now, it may sound a bit weird and nerdy for me to be quoting that, but you want to be putting that in your letter. So that's EU regulation 261/2004. By the way, there's a full article on the website where you can get far more details of everything I'm going to say, so don't worry that you're not going to put it down. Now, to count as an EU flight, it has to be any flight leaving an EU airport. So pretty easy, and of course we're still in the UK, in the EU, so any UK flight is an EU flight, or any flight arriving at an EU airport, but then provided it's an EU airline.
Right.
So, for example, London to New York, EU flight. New York to London on KLM or British Airways, EU flight. On Air India, not an EU flight. You're not covered by these regulations. If you are covered by these regulations, then it's not just delays this summer. You can go back, if you've had a delay or a cancellation at any time since 2011, you are still entitled to go back and get this money, and we often get really big wins reported on that.
So what is a delay? What counts as the delay then?
So
30 minutes?
I'm talking you must arrive 3 hours late, and the crucial word is arrive. You leave 4 hours late and get there 2 hours 55 minutes. And arrival technically counts, because this does get tricky. It's the time they open the plane doors. So if you've arrived over 3 hours late, then you're entitled to compensation. But this is the big one. It must have been the airline's fault. Bad weather, airport staff strikes, political dispute in a country, not the airline's faults. Staffing problems, poor planning, and now technical problems. There were lots of court cases on this. This has been cleared up. Unless it's a fault with the airline manufacturer. If it's a technical problem with the airline, that is the airline's fault. Now, they'll often try and fight you tooth and nail, and sometimes we've seen reports recently where airlines are saying, oh, it was bad weather, but when you had your announcement, they told you, sorry, our pilot hasn't turned up. So make a note of what it was, and you're going to need to go through it, and you're going to need to fight it.
Do you get cash?
Yeah, you're talking a fixed amount of cash, somewhere between £200 and £500 per person, depending on the delay length and depending on how far your flight was. That's for delays. I'll just throw in cancellations, because this gets it really even more interesting. If your flight is cancelled, then you're entitled to a choice of a refund or a new flight, regardless of whether it's the airline's fault. So you get that anyway, even if it's not the airline's fault. If it is the airline's fault and you're cancelled, and you arrive late on your replacement flight, then you are also usually entitled to compensation. And this is where it gets really interesting, so I'm trying to explain this. This is complex. You get a choice between a refund and an alternative flight. If you choose a refund, but the alternative flight they offered you arrives late, even if you chose the refund, you can get the compensation if it's the airline's fault based on the arrival time.
Even if you didn't do it?
Even if you didn't do it, because that was the best alternative you have, and therefore you get the delay compensation even though you chose a refund. So you're entitled to that. In a cancellation situation, it is subtly different.
Who do you speak to then to put this in place? Do you email, ring?
First thing you do is you get in touch with the airline. You can write to them, although there are free template letters and free tools online that will do this for you. You do not need to pay a claims handling company for doing this. You can do it yourself. I would only use a claims handling company at the very, very last stages if you're having to go to court. But most people won't have to do that. Start off doing it by yourself. Write to the airline. Some airlines, you've heard, a couple of days they pay up. After that, and especially using those tools and things out there, make it much easier to do. After that, if you get rejected, and that's very common, so don't sit there going, they've said no, it's over, you then have a choice, depending on the airline, sorry to make it complicated, of what's called alternative dispute resolution processes, and if one is available, you have to use it. Sometimes you might be asked to pay £25 that's refundable if you win for doing so. If you don't have one of those, you can go to the Civil Aviation Authority, although in some cases, if your flight was coming into the UK, you might have to use a foreign regulator to do it for you.
It's not easy, is it?
And if you get to the point where you can't cope with it, then you might want to use a claims firm. And I'd go for someone like Botts & Co, are a solicitors firm on a no-win, no-fee basis, who've been fighting this since the beginning. They're the one who put all the work in. So if you're going to... But I wouldn't do that in the first instance, because there's no need to do so, only if it's starting to get difficult.